Today, we are cracking open a letter that's nearly 2,000 years old. Now, on the surface, it looks like a simple request for money, but it's actually a masterclass in persuasion that holds some really surprising lessons about community, influence, and even how we think about wealth. All right, let's get into it.
We've all been there, right? Doesn't matter if it's for a charity, a school trip, or helping out a friend, that moment you have to ask for a donation can be just incredibly awkward. It is a universal human problem.
Well, it turns out that a writer from the ancient world, the Apostle Paul, faced this exact same challenge, but on a massive scale. And his solution, tucked away in a letter to his followers in a city called Corinth, was so revolutionary that, get this, scholars are still debating it today.
So, our investigation starts with the letter itself, specifically chapters 8 and 9 of 2 Corinthians. Now, you read it and it seems like a fundraising appeal. But if you dig just a little bit deeper, you find it's this incredibly complex and fascinating puzzle that people have been trying to solve for centuries. The mystery really starts right here. I mean, on one level, it's an appeal for money to help struggling communities back in Jerusalem. But the letter itself is what scholars call a composite. They think it's probably fragments of several different letters that were all edited together later. And the language is so specific and intricate that scholars can't even agree if this section was originally one single appeal or two separate ones stitched together. That's the puzzle we're going to try and decode.
Now, to really get what Paul is doing, we first have to understand the world he was writing in. We need to, survey the scene of the crime, so to speak, the social and economic landscape of the first century Greco-Roman world. See, back in Paul's day, society pretty much ran on something called the patron-client system. You had a wealthy patron who would support people of a lower status, the clients. But in return, those clients owed the patron their loyalty, public praise, and this deep, ongoing sense of obligation. It was all about hierarchy. It was transactional. This was just the default setting for how money and influence worked. And this is what makes Paul's approach so radical, so absolutely mind-blowing. Instead of that top-down hierarchy of patronage, he suggests a system based on equality. Instead of giving because you're obligated to, he talks about giving out of grace. And instead of trying to reinforce social status, he focuses on mutual participation. He was trying to completely rewire their social DNA. So let's get into the textual evidence and see exactly how he builds this case. We're going to start with chapter 8, where Paul lays out his blueprint for generosity, and he does it using inspiration and some really powerful core principles. So Paul does something really clever. He doesn't even start by talking about the Corinthians. Nope. He points to a completely different group, the Macedonians, and he presents this incredible paradox. He says that even though they were experiencing deep poverty, they somehow gave with a wealth of generosity. He's holding them up as this powerful, totally counterintuitive example of what's possible when your motivation is right. The way he does this is absolutely crucial. He avoids any words that sound like an order or an obligation. Instead, he uses the Greek word charis. Now, this word is a genius choice because on the one hand, it means divine grace, but it also means a gift or an act of generosity. Paul is intentionally blurring those lines. He's suggesting that their human act of giving is really just a reflection of the divine gift they've already received. It's not a debt you have to pay. It's grace that you get to share. And then he brings out his ultimate ethical model, Jesus. He uses this incredibly powerful reversal language. The one who is rich became poor so that the poor could become rich. This is the theological heart of his entire argument. But hold on, we have to be super careful here. Scholars are really clear that Paul is not talking about literal economics. The richness and poverty here are metaphors for status and honor. He's presenting an ethical model for them to imitate, to lower oneself for the benefit of other people. It's not a promise that if you give money, you'll get more money back. That's a much later interpretation that kind of misses the original point. So if the goal isn't to get rich, what is it? Well, Paul gives us another key Greek term, isotes. This basically means fairness or balance. He's not calling for some kind of total social revolution to upend the entire Roman economy. No, he's arguing for situational fairness, that the abundance that the Corinthian community has right now should meet the immediate need of the Jerusalem community, creating a temporary, beautiful balance. Okay, so let's move on to chapter 9 and see how this argument builds. Because here, Paul kind of shifts gears. He moves from all those high-minded principles to some very savvy social psychology and powerful rhetoric to motivate the Corinthians to actually finish what they started. Just look at the careful language he's using here.
He tells them to prepare their gift in advance so that it comes across as a eulogia, a blessing, something generous and willingly shared. And the alternative he warns them against is pleonexia, which means greed or even exploitation. He's framing their choice very clearly. Is this going to be a beautiful act of a shared blessing or a grudging payment that feels exploitative? And then we get to the famous agricultural metaphor of sowing and reaping. Now, it is crucial to understand this in its original context. This was just common ancient wisdom, a proverbial observation. It wasn't some magical cosmic law that guarantees a financial return on investment. The lesson is really simple. What you put in affects what you get out. Generosity creates the conditions for even more generosity to flourish. And all of this leads to maybe the most famous line from the entire letter. But the Greek word for cheerful is hilaros. It's where we get our word hilarious. It doesn't just mean not sad. It implies this willing, joyful, almost enthusiastic participation. So once again, he's steering them away from the language of obligation and compulsion and toward this ideal of joyful partnership. So let's put all the pieces of the puzzle together. In this last section, we can finally step back and see what Paul was really, truly trying to build. The key that unlocks everything is this final Greek word, koinonia. This is Paul's ultimate goal. It means participation, sharing, fellowship. He's arguing that this whole collection isn't just about money changing hands. It's an act of koinonia. It's a way for these communities, separated by huge distances, to actually participate in each other's lives, to forge a shared identity. He transforms giving from a simple transaction into a powerful relationship. You know, this conversation is far from over. To this day, scholars still debate whether the letter is one document or several, the exact nature of the equality Paul was aiming for, and whether he was totally rejecting the patronage system or just trying to adapt it. This letter is still an incredibly rich source for understanding the ancient world. So the crucial point is this. The collection was the means, not the end. Paul's real project wasn't just to raise funds. It was to use this fundraising project to build an entirely new kind of community, a global network of believers connected not by Roman patronage and obligation, but by a shared identity built on mutual participation and grace. And that kind of leaves us with a final question, doesn't it? In a world that is still so often shaped by wealth and status and obligation, can this 2,000-year-old guide to giving challenge how we think about what it really means to build a true community today?